In the reading corner today, I'm really excited to be welcoming back author extraordinaire Steve Cole, who wears so many hats. But today, the hat that he's going to be wearing for us is to do with his writing for Barrington Stoke. And there are 4 novels or novellas: Tin Boy, World Burned Down, Welcome to Trashland, and Stitched Up, all with a theme of using the world's resources to best effect and also protecting the rights of children who are somehow embroiled in the stories around how those resources are used. And they are very popular novels with primary but also with secondary. And although they're published for Barrington Stoke, who we know produce excellent dyslexia-friendly novels, in fact, these stories can be read by anybody, and we know so many children enjoy a quick read regardless of their reading attainment and ability. We're going to take our listeners on a bit of a journey through all 4 books and perhaps spend a little longer on the most recent book, Stitched Up. So first of all, welcome back, Steve.
Hello, hello, hello.
You might be the most interviewed person on In the Reading Corner. It's quite possible. We've talked about Doctor Who.
We did do that.
We've talked about humour.
Always a good one. Makes me laugh.
There's not much space for humour in these 4 books, is there?
Not a huge amount. No, this is true. And for someone like me, who's, I suppose, in some of my best known books, mind that humorous theme quite deeply. But like anybody, as a human being, one has to be interested in and concerned about certain things happening on the planet, which don't make us laugh. And I think it's only honest to have to reflect those. And really, writing for Barrington Stoke was an outlet for some of that discomfort and, frankly, some of that fear that strikes me about the future. When I see young people, I kind of realize that for them, it's like grown-ups have been partying for a long, long time, and who's going to have to clean up the mess in the morning? It's not them, it's the children. And they have some pretty tough decisions they're going to be facing. And the books, I hope, just provide a little context. They're not supposed to preach, they're not supposed to ram any message down their throats, but hopefully may open some empathy for the plight of less fortunate children in other times and places, and also just to make them feel, I think the pandemic showed us that we're not isolated, that what happens here is linked, however much you might want it to be, to other areas in the world, that decisions taken on the other far side of the planet resonate all around everywhere. So we are all in it together. And these books were an attempt to show children that.
I want to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about Stitched Up and how you position the reader, because you are talking very directly in a way, or your protagonist is talking very directly to a reader. But before we get there, I just want to push that idea that you've mentioned about not preaching, because they are good stories, they work as stories, but you do have a view. And I do believe that you want readers to come away with a perspective. So I take the point that you're not lecturing, but it's not anything goes either, is it really?
It depends what someone wants to take away from it. I personally don't think you can read the book and not feel a certain sympathy with the main characters and the life they're forced to endure, or the circumstances they find themselves caught up in. And so the trick with it is, I think, is that I want to present a good story first and foremost, using an issue as the backdrop. So it's not just the geography of the place, it's the issues facing that place that the child is embroiled in. Like it or not, we're all kind of caught up in this. And I think for children in this country, that's quite an eye-opener. I think that for some of the teachers and parents who get the book, it's something of an eye-opener too. And so, yes, in the back of the book, I think my manifesto is fairly evident. But equally, there are no easy answers. Change has to come from above, and we have to try and exert some influence on the harbingers of change in order to make that happen.
Take us into the story of Tin Boy. I think Tin Boy was the first one of the four.
It was. Tin Boy was an idea that I'd had lurking in my mind ever since some years ago. I wrote a book called Invisible Ink, which was one of my funny books, where modern day boy meets a lady Victorian inventor, a French medieval knight called Sir Guy Diop, and his pony Maloney, having to face up against an evil wizard who wanted to bring about the destruction of the world through fantastical means, rather than through polluting it to death or something similar. And because the main characters, the protagonists, were sort of invisible, hence invisible ink, as in incorporated rather than the stuff you write with, I needed them to be able to communicate with something. I was looking for a medium they could use, and I think I was swinging from a can of soft drink. It made my voice resonate oddly, and I thought maybe they could use metal to communicate with. And I started looking into likely metals and found out, because I wanted them to be able to use a mobile phone without being able to press the buttons by using the internal workings of the phone. And I looked to see what metals were used inside a mobile phone, and tin is used in the solder inside the circuit boards. And so a lot of tin goes into the gadgets that we use. And that just led me on to reading about how the tin arrives in the supply chain. And I was quite shocked by what happens and the effect, both social and ecological, it's had on these places. Like Indonesia, some beautiful places have ended up scarred wastelands as a result of the tin mining. It's dredged out at sea, it's combines tearing up the land, and when the big combines move out, then all the scavengers move in, the poorer families who will earn a little more money than they would working in a factory or as carpenters or as fisher folk. They need to try and sort of gather some of this tin ore to sell. And because they can't be sending their kids to school while they're out doing this, the children then become a part of the scavenging. And it's not safe because the sites are not effectively propped. They're not safety proofed in any way. So quite often there are landslides coming in that move so fast, you can be maimed or killed very quickly. And there's child mortality as a result of that. So it made me think, how is this allowed by these huge corporations? And they're all, of course, striving for the lowest possible price for the raw materials. And because it's a supply chain with many, many steps, there are always people looking to drive down the price right the way down to the very bottom. This is something that turns up in Stitched Up as well, of course, and in Welcome to Trashland to a degree. So I think it was finding that the idea of a child being digging under the sea, because there's lots of stuff online which shows you these rather pitiful sights of children trying to wear wetsuits, but they're in bits, they're old, they're falling apart, using very primitive breathing apparatus from old generators pumping down filthy air. It makes you quite angry. And I was imagining a child down there being buried alive in a moment, how awful that would be. And I had this image of them being dragged out with their hands clasped around this stone, a kind of an odd, almost glowing stone. And the idea being a child hoping this was some sort of superhero origin story, that this stone actually kept them safe. Whereas in fact, it could just be a piece of polished glass from the bottom of the ocean that ended up in his hand. What would people think? What would the reaction be? And by pursuing the idea of this boy being able to sell his presence at a mining site as a kind of a charm against accidents, there seems something slightly pathetic but all too plausible about it as well. And so that was where the idea of Tin Boy came from. Originally, it was a darker story, and it would have ended less happily than it does. I know some people argue it doesn't end very happily, but it would have ended rather more terminally for poor Tono, the Tin Boy. But being mindful of the darkness, I found I was unable to write that. But it was the idea that Barrington Stoke had very kindly asked me to pitch an idea. I'd already done 2 books for them, Mind Writer and Senseless. And just in a paragraph, I pitched Tin Boy, and about half an hour later, the big editor there, came back and said, yes, we'd like to do this. So it was the fastest pitch. There was no writing sample involved. There was no acquisition meeting. It was just, yes, we want to do this. Can you please write it for us? So that was hugely empowering.
It was very well received, very popular. Teachers picked it up really quickly, I think. And it was followed by World Burned Down, right, which is a slightly different theme, not so much about commodities, but it is another social justice story.
It is, but that distinction you make is important, because that's the reason that World Burned Down isn't told in the first person, unlike the other three. So it's slightly different in that it's the third person, because for me the Amazon rainforest fires were so terrifying and disturbing. I felt it needed to be a narrator outside of Carlos. I wanted it to be more a kind of a universal thing, to show that he is caught up in events that threaten his life, but we all are caught up in those events through no fault of our own. And it is distressing to have to challenge them, because we feel powerless and we feel small. And so for me, it was really a kind of a reasoning out the stance I wanted to take, which was that we have to become fighters in this. We can't keep turning off the news or looking at a nice little video of a kitten being cute instead, because it soothes the nerves. So again, it's not making any grand claim for World Burned Down. It's just wanting to tell an exciting story against that backdrop, and how that backdrop has influenced the dangers that Carlos finds himself in. And I showed it to a friend of mine who said, well, all Carlos does is run. He's not driving the plot at all. He's running from it. And I said, yeah, well, that's exactly it. Because none of us are driving this plot.
The fire is driving the plot.
Exactly, because nothing in the rainforest has prepared it for fire. It is purely a human intervention. None of us are able to own this narrative enough. None of us are able to do anything other than run. So that is exactly why Carlos is caught up in it. It's one of those issues that we are all trapped in, and in a way, the fates of our children's children are being decided right now.
Interesting, because since you wrote that, it was published in 2020. I'm guessing you wrote it possibly in 2019. I don't know how quickly Barrington Stoke get their books out, but since you wrote that, in the last 3 years, the increase in those fires, not only in the Amazon, but in Australia, the bushfires, in California. Cornelia Funke was in the reading corner a few months ago, and of course she lost her house and had to move to Italy as a result of the Californian fires. So they're increasing and they're widespread.
This is it. It's not even yet. It's not just happening a long way away in a place that we can't own, because we can't understand the size of the rainforest, because it is truly vast. At the same time, we can't understand the amount of destruction that's happening as well. But when you can see it from space, that becomes disturbing, I think. And so, I think it's just very, very basic education. Because I realized that I wasn't really aware of what was driving some of this deforestation. So for me, it was a case of wanting to educate myself and pass on some of my findings to a younger audience, so they wouldn't grow up as ignorant as I was.
So by this time, 2 books in, are you thinking about writing not a series, but a collection of books that somehow sit alongside each other? So Welcome to Trashland being the next, and a title that has it's an ironic title.
Yes, it is. Originally it was, I think, just going to be called Trashland, but Welcome to Trashland, and you are welcome to it. It's got that little extra sense. It's like the book is introducing itself in a way, again, wanting to make itself known. And yes, an ironic title, because it's not the most welcoming of places. But in a way, the recycling that is done in places like Agbogbloshie and other areas of hardcore recycling, right down and dirty, where the stuff has to happen, we're disowning it. We're burying our rubbish in other people's countries. the full details are yet to emerge, but I'm sure they will. And I think it's fair to say that we can't rely on people washing up their tins and meals for one plastic trays and expect the world to be saved. There's more has to be done.
Tell us briefly about the story of Welcome to Trashland.
Yeah, Welcome to Trashland is all about Theo, who's only young, he's about 12 or 13, who found himself at this dump. It covers a few square miles in Africa, in Ghana, and it's where a lot of secondhand electronics end up, from refrigerators, washing machines, computer terminals, stereos, AirPods, phones, they're all there. This is where they end up getting recycled the hard way. People burning the plastic insulation from copper wires to get the copper, which they can sell on. People essentially chemically breaking down mobile phones to get to the precious metals inside, which of course gives off poisonous smokes and fumes. There's a food market in Nagrablushi as well. Obviously that food then gets sold all around the city, but it's growing out of polluted soil, and there are dangerously high levels of contaminants within that food. So it's a clear example of how pollution can affect a population. But that's just going on in the background. This is a story of a treasure hunt, really, between Theo and this new boy that arrives at the dump called Emmanuel, who has a map, he thinks, that will lead him to some treasure that his brother hid there in Trashland. And they have to find a way to get to it. And it's a dangerous place, the dump, of course. It's unpoliced. It's managed fairly brutally, with hundreds of children scavenging about for enough metal they can sell to the guy, who will then sell it on to the wholesaler, who will then sell it on to a smelter, or so on throughout the process. So it's about these people trapped in circumstances that aren't ideal, but wanting to better themselves. And I think that we can all relate to those situations, whoever we are, wherever we are. There's that desire to dream big and to have a chance of your dreams come true. And through the book, in fact, they do, not perhaps in entirely the ways that they would hope, but Emmanuel and Theo and Gifty, who's a child teacher, they all find their worlds changed by what's going on. So again, it's wanting to tell a story with a backdrop more meaningful than what's happening in the next town or the next city or in a made-up space place.
So it's interesting because in Tin Boy you talk a little bit about a sort of not fantasy element, but a magical element in the story. And World Burned Down is very much a thriller. And Welcome to Trashland, you've got a bit of an adventure going on within that story. When we come to Stitched In, it just feels incredibly realistic throughout. It's like there isn't that element other than an escape attempt.
Yes, it's kind of it's essentially a kind of a Colditz type situation, really, except with children in a modern day sweatshop in Vietnam. So yeah, Stitched Up. I don't know if it's perhaps the hardest hitting, because they all have hostile environments, these books, but everything takes place in the same hostile environment in Stitched Up. The children live, if you can call it living. They endure there. They work, they sleep, they eat. They're prisoners. They're allowed to kind of traipse around the exercise yard in the evening. And of course, like any prisoners, they dream of escape. And the difference between Stitched Up and the other three is that the protagonists have been actively sold a dream maliciously that can't come true. And it's how they respond to that. The others are caught up in circumstances because of their circumstances. Theo is dropped off at Trashland by his father, who then disappears and leaves him there. Carlos is kidnapped. Tono is having to work to help his uncle when his father's been killed in a landslide. But in Stitched Up, people have come together to basically trick the parents of these children and take them away to an unpleasant place. So I think that's perhaps why the fantasy element didn't seem so appropriate. There are, because it's set in Vietnam, I didn't want to feel like I was appropriating anything, but equally, I wanted to illustrate that, it's a story that can take place anywhere. We know there are sweatshops in Leicester, for example,
Yeah.
that have been in the news. These things, in India and in America, these things are happening. So, but I think it's important for children to realize that the clothes they're getting where they live may have had an origin they weren't aware of somewhere far off. And it's just, as with all the other books, to consider their own lives and the luck and freedoms that they have, and then to consider how it is sometimes for other people. Not in a serious and not in a seriously downbeat, oppressive way, I hope, but a way of telling a story and then realizing, oh God, actually this could be happening to people. Maybe I want to be involved in affecting some change in this situation.
It did seem to me that the voice in this one, Hanh, the protagonist, is very aware of the reader, if you like. She seems to be addressing them directly. Maybe you do this in your country. Have you thought about this? Was that more so in this book than the others?
Yes, I think there are moments in Trashland where Theo starts talking to the reader directly. It's probably related to my own sense of anger of some of the issues that make me want to not beat about the bush so much, perhaps. But also just, I think that if, having watched some of the videos of the survivors of situations like this, they're committed to making things different for other children, or reminding some children that things are different in other places. Mm-hmm. So I think it felt true to Hanh, who is a survivor of this situation, that she would address the people and inform them of what has happened. The fact that I hope that it's a compelling and exciting story as well, it helps, I think.
And it is a good, you are on the edge of your seat, hoping that these girls who work together to try and effect an escape, and you're not sure whether it's going to work, whether it will, whether it won't, is help going to come? So you are on the edge of your seat through reading this story. I think the thing that really gets me, and ever since reading this book, every time I've seen somebody with deliberately distressed jeans on, I say to my husband, surely this has got to die out as a fashion soon, because that's what this factory does, Yes. It sandblasts the jeans, it gets the tears in there. And how stupid does that seem to us?
Yeah, I think Hanh has a comment saying, when did this become a thing? We take this perfectly good material and we ruin it. We put holes in it. We make it look old and worn so we can sell it for more money. It's an interesting thing. And, I feel I should add that there are many reputable textiles manufacturers who do the sandblasting in different. They don't do the sandblasting. They do the distressing either with lasers or in ways that don't pollute. But of course, for the cheap fashions, the fast fashions, where there is less and less accountability, the further you follow the supply chain down, because the big retail houses are looking for the cheapest price, all the way down, there are people squeezing their suppliers to the point where the reputable manufacturers can no longer afford to make the product to that specification. And that's when they turn to the factories employing the slave labor. That's when they turn to the places that are using harmful measures to achieve results. Hanh, the name means right thinking. And all the way through, I could hear her voice quite clearly. And she's concerned about other people in factories and always wanting to give them the benefit of the doubt. She knows that there were masks in the sweatshop which were meant to protect them slightly from the levels of silica in the air. But then there was an inspection at another factory, so the masks were taken away to give to them, and they never came back, those masks. So they've been working without them ever since. But she's saying, well, I hope that the children wearing them are okay, because maybe things are even worse for them. And that kind of sense of social justice, I just found it quite moving as I was writing through it. These kids don't deserve what's happened to them.
Are there any more books in this vein to come?
I don't know. I think I don't want to make it feel like I'm trying to profit out of suffering. I already refer to these as my misery memoirs because I'm aware that they're a little different from my stuff. I don't want to kind of invent reasons to explore certain situations. I feel that I've covered 4 distinct areas that are big ones. The fashion industry is driving huge amounts of planetary harm through overproduction and wasteful production. So I don't want to start repeating myself or just trying to exploit those situations. I'd rather draw people's attention through a good story. But when a situation comes up and I think of a good enough story to tell against that backdrop, then yes, chances are I will pitch it, because I will want to explore it myself and take readers along for the ride.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Steve, and I look forward to hearing what the next project, whatever that will be. Maybe we'll get the chance to chat again about that. So thank you for joining me today.
Always a pleasure, Nikki, always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. If you would like to find out about other events and courses, visit justimagine.co.uk. Join us again in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.